Hello and welcome to this video podcast from BioProcessing Journal. We're glad you could make it. Our host is BPJ's Editor-in-Chief, Keith Carson, and our special guest.
This morning, I'm interviewing Dr. Brandon Price, who's a scientist, businessman, and entrepreneur for over 40 years in the biopharmaceutical and medical device industries. Dr. Price has been a CEO of a synthetic vaccine company, a small molecule company, a stem cell company, biologic CDMO, and a transgenic production company making human proteins and tobacco plants. Maybe best known for his work in contract testing as the VP for Biotechnology Services at Cardinal Health, co-founder of Quality Biotech, and senior executive at BioAlliance when it went public in 1997. Holds a Bachelor of Science and a PhD in Biophysics from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Is the author of more than 50 scientific and business articles. Currently sits on several corporate boards, works with a number of startup companies, and teaches entrepreneurship and business planning for innovative-driven startups. As an adjunct professor in the engineering school at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, and international professor at the Universidad Panamericana School of Engineering and Business, while he resides with his wife Susie in Guadalajara, Mexico. Well, so except for stumbling over the university, I'll record it again later. So
call it Pan American University. That's fine too. Use the English.
Yeah, you know what? And I had even practiced this. I've had my 2 formal years of Spanish in high school, and it's fairly limited. But well, good. Yeah, and I think that we may have met in the early 90s or right at the end of the 80s when you had started up Quality Biotech up in Camden.
Mm-hmm.
So we came up to visit you for some reason and met you in Forest Anthony.
Right.
So
well, actually, then too, there are other reasons because I was involved with other folks in the startup of what was called the Biotechnology Association. It was for the small companies, right? And we were doing this meeting called BioEast. And also BioWest. And so I was involved in the programming for that along with Dr. Mackler, Bruce Mackler. And so I know that we were involved in those kind of things as well, apart from Forest and Quality Biotech.
do you remember when the first BioEast was? It was
it was
392 maybe?
Yeah, early 90s, would have been early 90s. And when that was the Association of Biotechnology Companies, ABC was the name of the organization.
Right.
And it was for smaller companies, more on the East Coast. And there was the Industrial Biotechnology Association, the Amgens and the Genentechs out in the West Coast, and they merged and BioEast disappeared, probably in the late 90s.
Well, and I remember distinctly the blizzard that occurred, and at the same time, January in DC, right?
Right.
So and you had to cancel everything, which and then the CAS meeting that's so popular on more regulatory than anything, I think. That meeting was the same week, and they had to cancel. So. Meetings are wonderful things, but they're very risky.
Yes, well, that's true. But that meeting, that BioEast meeting, was really a good meeting for the industry.
Definitely.
That one of the one thing I'm proud of in that meeting is that because it was in DC, right, we could invite the FDA to come, and at that time, the FDA was kind of thinking about things, and they just written their points to consider documents and so forth and so on. And everyone was worried about how they were going to deal with this new biologics entity, right? And I had a
Hmm.
session there called, I forget the name of it, but what we did is we invited 5 or 6 FDA people from the old Bureau of Biologics to talk
Yeah.
about various regulatory strategies, not just for biopharmaceuticals, but as well uh, medical devices and things like that. And they'd have little 5 or 10 minute talks. And then, but the purpose of the meeting was to have them answer questions in an anonymous way. So
Uh,
as they were droning on, there would be there was usually like 1,000 people. It was in a huge room. It was a very popular session, right? And there would be people coming through the audience collecting questions that audience members wanted to ask the FDA, which were obviously specific maybe to their particular thing, but
right.
they didn't want the FDA to know where the question was coming from. And then they would bring the questions to me. I would sort through them, and there might be a commonality. Then I would, after their sessions, I would ask them a bunch of questions, and they would answer. They were really forthright and outspoken, and people got their questions answered. And I think it was helpful, but it also at the same time developed for us, for me in particular, a relationship, right, with these
It's all,
people. So
yeah,
so
all about
when
relationships. Yeah.
right. And when I was at working for either testing companies or manufacturing companies, then I could call them. And they would answer my question, and it was a good sales tactic, right? Back in those days.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and to watch things develop as they did. I think I told you I was at Flow Labs at
Hmm.
the time, or
Hmm.
up until the early '90s,
Right.
and watched the development of the media and buffer business. Supplying them in bags instead of 1 liter bottles, right? And
Right.
serum, of course, uh, fetal calf serum or fetal bovine serum, should I say?
Yeah. Hmm.
He watched that, and then the 50-gallon drums that we called Meals on Wheels,
Yeah.
and then the development of all the consumable products, the bags and
Mhm.
sterilized uh, configurations of bags and filters, and so all of that just kind of happened at the same time that well, the insect cell culture became interesting
Mhm.
with Max Summers' work out in Texas, and
Right.
uh, so much was happening. And then I remember uh, you were at Microbiological Associates,
Mhm.
and then the when the I guess it was '97, wasn't it? Yeah, 1997 when it went public.
Mhm.
And it was Bethesda Research Labs and Microbiological Associates that merged, right?
Well, no,
It was
MA,
a long time ago.
I joined Microbiological Associates. They hired a new CEO in '92, and I joined along with him, but we didn't know about each other being hired. And
Yeah,
uh, and at the time, it was about a 45-year-old company, a private company held in the main by a particular investor. And if it had a good year, it was 10 or 11 million in revenues, and a bad year, it was 9 or 10 million. It lost a million, maybe it broke even. But what we did is they had many divisions. They had animal testing division, they had toxicology testing, they had uh, uh, virus testing and things like that. That was involved with people, making antibodies and cell lines and things like that. And we just merged them all and created an entity where we had one marketing and sales effort instead of five, all that kind of stuff. And
right.
we started uh, making inroads. And of course, the industry was starting to boom about then. And we went from 10 million to 44 million in
Oh,
revenues
wow.
in 4 years. And we're pretty well dominating this. And then we renamed ourselves, rebranded ourselves, if you will, Bio Reliance, and took it public in '97. But a large part of that obviously was the growth of the industry, right? I mean, it was just exploding, as you point out. And it's it's more than testing services, it's manufacturing, it's all the components and supplies that go into that. Um, uh, it was a really interesting time, and for me anyway, one of the most exciting times in my life when things were just exploding every which way, right? And there were certainly competition, but we had a lot of good customers. At one point, we had like 2,000 customers, uh,
Wow.
and we were probably doing 50 to 100,000 different kinds of tests, animal tests or safety tests a year. And we had
Right.
regional salespeople. We had offices in Europe and in Japan, Tokyo. So it was a really interesting time in the life of the industry.
Oh, it was. It was just things were happening so quickly, and watch the serum business be just totally taken over by Cyclone,
Yeah.
and so it was just amazing to watch how fast it, and then of course all the plate readers and plate washers and all the work done and analytical applications. And I think at one time, BioReliance was the only company that you could go to have a viral product vial.
Yeah, that would have been a little bit after my time. I was involved in the building of manufacturing site to do vialing and other kinds of things related to viruses, right? In Rockville, Maryland, which is where the company was located. But I had gone on to another company before that plant was completed. But I was invited back to the opening ceremony of the plant, and another guy and I who were involved in that were feted at that ceremony. It was really a good time of the life. But as to the explosion of the industry. Um, I was uh, with a company, a Goodwin Biotechnology manufacturing CDMO in 2003, and we were looking to expand, right? And I gave a talk at the Mid-Atlantic Venture Association conference, and we were looking for, I don't know, 20 million in equity to expand, and and we had some predictions on the CDMO industry and related services. And at the time, and this was in 2003, it was about a $500 million business around the world. Okay. And we were projecting, we thought rather gloriously, that it would be about 2.4 billion by 2010, and we were going to get our share of that business, right, by expanding and so forth. Um,
Yeah,
but boy, oh boy, it really happened faster than that. Ultimately, they were actually acquired, and in fact, I still sit on their board, but it has a new name now. It's called GBI Biomanufacturing. But they were acquired as a
okay.
result of interest at that meeting by an Indian company. And but if you look at what happened with the industry, biologics, CDMOs, just biologics, CDMOs. I don't have the numbers for 2010, but I can tell you in 2017, it was about 15 billion. In 2022, it was around 20, 21 billion, depending upon the service you go to and the numbers. And
Oh, sure.
they're expecting it to be over 30 billion, just biologic CDMO and related industries by 2030. So the thing really exploded, and it's part of a larger, I guess you'd say, pharmaceutical CDMO business, which is going to be over 100 billion by 2030. So it's pretty impressive growth. No
Yeah,
matter, we thought we were being overly optimistic, as you tend to be with projections of.
that'll bring it up to half of Elon Musk's uh, net worth at this point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and his is exploding too. So it's been a phenomenal journey, uh, but one of the interesting things is that biologics are becoming complex, right? I mean, we used to talk about antibodies and monoclonal, and that's complex. There's complexity enough in engineering a cell line, putting a gene in a transcriptionally active area, and getting a good output in terms of milligrams per hour from a milliliter of cell culture or whatever, however you make your measurement. But what has happened is that it's gone way beyond what we ever thought it would what we ever thought it would be in terms of complexity, because now we can make antibodies, no problem. We got lots of antibodies to make, but now we're making bispecific antibodies. We're doing antibody fragments. We're doing conjugation to antibodies, right? So using the antibody as a missile to bring home to a cancer cell a payload. Could be a
Yeah.
radioactive component, could be some a cancer killer component like Temodar is for brain cancer, right? And so the complexity has also driven the industry too. Because it's one thing to be technically complex, right? Say if you're going to conjugate some payload to an antibody, and there's technology and complexity related to that. And there's also logistics, right? You need to source materials and bring them in and perform chemistry on them. But there's also a regulatory complexity, which goes really beyond belief. Again, as I mentioned, I sit on the board for Goodwin, which is now renamed as GBI Biomanufacturing. And I just wanted to give you an example of that.
Hmm.
They have an antibody that is one of their clients has an antibody made overseas. Okay. It's shipped in cold form to their facility, which is in Florida, in Plantation. And then what they do is they conjugate a chelator to that antibody. Okay, that's their job. They could make it, but it's made somewhere else. Conjugate
Right.
a chelator, and then that is shipped off to yet another company that actually will vial it and put it in kit form because it's going to ultimately be radio labels going to be attached, and you need to do that right at the bedside almost, right? So they have to make kits with radio labels and with this
That's
conjugated
something.
antibody. Now the
Yeah.
biological there's a biological complexity. We understand that. There's a logistics and supply chain complexity, but there's a regulatory complexity because now that the FDA has to approve that they have to go overseas. They have to visit the company that makes the antibody. They've got to visit, GBI Biomanufacturing to show that the conjugation and all of that of the chelator is done right. They got to go to the vialer and then the kit maker, and they've got to do it while they're actually making material for clinical trial. That's
And,
complexity
and
too. So
keeping everything from being contaminated.
absolutely, and all the things they worry about. So it's gotten more complex. And so, if I would have any advice to somebody who's thinking about doing this, is try to merge as many of these operations into one facility or one company as possible, because
Yeah.
travel and all that is precipitous at best when you got antibody involved and things like that. So it's that's what's gotten me really excited is the and because we have more complex biologics, we can address uh, uh, more well-defined problems like brain cancer, for example. So it's
And,
still an interesting place to be and will be for
and
some
then
time.
didn't you mentioned an antibody that uh, crossed the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, one of the companies I work with is happens to be a virtual company, and this is another thing that's happened, right? It's nobody builds facilities anymore, and of course that's contributed to the growth of the CDMO industry. But yeah, a company I work with, Nascent Biotech. I'm a co-founder, a genius scientist out in California, developed an antibody which seems to be able to kill brain cancer cells. That's cool, and that's nice. And they're in clinical trial now. However, what's really interesting about the antibody is it's the only a full monoclonal antibody I know of that crosses readily the blood tumor barrier without requirement for any. So they can administer it, IV or something like that, and it gets to the cancer. And they're in starting phase 2 clinical trials. So that's an interesting thing in and of itself because you would like to be able to cross that barrier uh,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
with a missile, which the antibody is. It targets to a particular cell surface target, in this case on the brain cancer cells. But there's so much science, so much chemistry, so much good stuff that it's good stuff for a scientist.
Yeah. And then at the same time, we're seeing automation just growing by leaps and bounds. And now with artificial intelligence officially launched,
Mhm.
I have to wonder how long we've really had artificial intelligence, but they just decided to start calling it that
Mhm.
because at Flow Labs, one of their subsidiaries was working on AI back in the 80s when I was there.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, I'm not sure exactly how it's all going to fit together. Right now, I think if this platform or template is made available, and then you have to adapt it to what you're doing,
Yeah.
obviously.
Well, yeah, actually, in my courses, I talk about AI and its implications for business, right? For entrepreneurial businesses. Not so much for the science of the business, but how marketing people and the salespeople and other, operations planning people can use AI. But I was at a conference in Richmond, by Zoom, of course, another
Uh, Another
year
thing,
ago.
yes.
And a lot of people are worried about AI and am I going to lose my job, and there's a lot of concern about that. I think a general public concern. And this was a conference with a bunch of techies, high tech AI types, and at the end it was only a day long, and they were kind of summarizing what they had heard, and people had asked questions. One of the questions was, "Well, am I going to lose my job to AI?" And their conclusion was, "Well, you're probably not going to lose your job to AI, but you will lose your job if you don't know how to use AI in your job."
Yeah.
And
Oh, that's right.
so I think there was a lot of merit in that statement, and I
Yeah.
use it, and I know scientists use it when they're, of course, designer proteins, and when you get all these complex chemistries involved, AI can be a very helpful tool. If nothing else, to help you understand what's going on in the world and other places, and you can adapt those things to your particular need. So,
So uh, computers are big enough now and fast enough to do
mhm.
this.
Yes.
So, but what else really changed to make it an AI universe now versus what we had before?
Well, I think it's the ability to access data in the cloud, right? A lot of what AI does is helps you understand data. And data can be in many places. But since we've been doing online publications, for example, yours and
Mhm.
others, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of data out there. Data from clinical trials is all in the cloud. Um, and so it's a matter of searching for the right kind of data that meets your needs or answers a question you have. So I think this having everything in the cloud is a big deal. Um,
Yeah.
and then, of course, developing the algorithms to search for it, find it, be able to make conclusions from it, that kind of thing is really, really important. Um, Now, as to whether it becomes sentient or self-aware or something like that,
Yeah.
I don't know about that. That's for me more of a philosophical question. But there are
Yeah.
engineers who
Really
study
is.
that and say, well, it's going to happen, and then what's going to happen to us? I don't know.
Yeah. Terminator 3.
Yeah, there you
So,
go. Well, luckily, I'm at an age where, a lot of that stuff is kind of in the front of my car, and I'm looking more in the back of my car.
yeah. So the one thing you mentioned too, I mean, you've had so many positions,
Mhm.
high level positions in these
Mhm.
companies.
Yeah.
Um, can you pick a favorite one that experience that you enjoyed the most? Any particular company?
Yep, we're leaving you with a cliffhanger. For the answer to this burning question and others, we invite you to watch part 2. Thanks for being with us. We want you to participate in upcoming podcasts. Would you like to be interviewed, share your thoughts, or become a sponsor? Email Keith Carson to discuss ideas for future videos. So long.